All right, we're live. I'm Dr. Wegmann, your host with the Purpose Maker podcast, and today is going to be an interesting conversation. We are going to talk about a lot of things. This is my daughter Hope. She is second year in college,
Going really
and
fast.
I bet it's going really fast. She's studying some interesting things, so we'll get into that. But we're basically going to talk about life. Transitions, identity, purpose, how these all play into how we see ourselves and where we're going in the future. So I got a couple questions to get us kicked off here. Miss Hope, what's the first thing that drew you to the interest in the cosmos?
There's two really big things that stand out to me. Um, and I guess that our audience wouldn't know this really well, but you and I have a very close relationship, and close in the sense that we have made it a big deal, or at least you have, talking to me a lot when I was like, obviously now, and even when I was in like middle school, elementary, high school was obviously a very influential part of any kid's life. And what we did, which I think really kind of spearheaded my love for space and my almost obsession with it, is our nights that we had together. So where we live up in northern Michigan, there is honestly, which I realized how grateful I am for it now, little to no light pollution up there. Like, you have Petoskey next to us, which is a
Yes.
very small city, and Lansing does not have much light pollution. There's little to no people there. So where we are at is in between both of those, and we have such a cool spot. And what him and I used to do was go out. I think we had a cot like once in a while, or it was just blankets,
We
and
had
we
the
would go.
lounge
Yeah,
chairs that laid all the way back.
yeah. We've
Yep.
tried a couple things for sure, and I think going out there and just kind of like, we weren't there to just look at stars too. Like, yes, we were doing that, and they were amazing, but we were also talking too. And I think that is what a lot of kids miss out on now, is like that talking sense. And honestly, if people start talking about it more, like having good conversations with people in general, luckily I have parents that love to have good conversations. That has helped me a lot. And then the second part of it would be one of your friends, actually. So Mr. Fred Hackle.
Oh,
And I believe, yeah, I know it's funny because he's gonna laugh at this. I don't even know if he remembers it because it was so long ago. But it was, I believe I was sitting down with him in the office, and he was about to get like an adjustment or something. And we were talking, and this had to have been early high school, maybe sophomore year. And he was asking me like what I wanted to do, like my college and stuff. I'm a sophomore, or at least I was a sophomore in high school, and I have absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. And then he kind of hits me with like, hey, like, do you want to do what your parents are doing? Like, obviously, you and mom are both extremely educated, and you both became doctors. And he was like, do you want to go medical field? Like, do you want to follow in their tracks? And me being funny and facetious half the time, I was like, no, like, that's not my calling. That's not really what I'm into. Granted, I am a sophomore. I have no idea what I'm into, but I had that idea that that wasn't the thing. But then I kind of went back, and I was like, well, being a doctor, like, you can tell, bring up any web search, and like, hey, they make a good amount of money depending on like what profession you go into, obviously, and what specialty. But I was bringing up the whole money factor. And as you know, Fred has done very well for himself. And he goes, ditch the money. Like, just don't even think about that. And then he asked me, he follows up with, what is something you can see yourself doing in like a couple years for the rest of your life? Because that's ideally what we do. You spend the first 20 years kind of becoming you, and then, I don't know, perfecting your craft to go into a workforce, because that is how life works. Like, you get trained to go into the workforce. And then he goes, if money wasn't a thing, you could do anything without the money side of it. What would it be? And space became the first, it was the first thing that popped in my head. Like, yeah, I think business is really cool. I'd love to own my own business. But What
What
if you could do
what about space? Like just looking at the planets and the stars, or what is it about space that interests you?
it's the unknown. So we live on a pretty much rock right now, if you think about it. We're just on a rock that's
Third
hurling through
rock from the
space.
sun.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And we can't make sense of what's happening outside of like our, I guess, our base domain. So when you look at space, it's something that we don't really have an idea about. And one of the big things that I did a paper on was like dark matter and dark energy. So
Hmm.
5% of space is like your hard matter, like your meteors, your planets, your suns, like your stars, everything. That makes up less like 5% or less of space. So that also begs the question is what else is out there? And I think that
Sure.
was something that really like kind of like, oh my gosh, like we know nothing about this. Like it is super cool to think about. There's obviously a ton of questions and there always will be. But
There's
if
some
I have
interesting
the ability
questions.
to do that, yeah, and going back to the Fred thing, like if I have the ability to do that without being paid, I would do it for the rest of my
Mm,
life. But then he goes, if you want to do that so badly,
right.
getting paid isn't going to be the hard part. It's getting there. And granted, it is. Like,
Getting there,
honestly, the
yeah.
stuff, the stuff that I'm learning right now has my head spinning at a million miles per hour, but I love it too. So
So,
that's something that really hurled
what's
me
a
towards that.
question in this realm that keeps you up at night? Like, what do you think about?
Uh, um, I'd really like to say, like, life, like, if we are the only, like, intelligent species, which I don't know, it's something that I really think about because it also brings in kind of like um a
Is there a
god.
creator? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
No, that's a
creator
great
and
one.
his creations. Like I've been kind of studying I've been studying the Bible more now because I also found that a lot of the space stuff that we like the scientific breakthroughs that we have seen since like the 18th century have been
Mhm.
predicted by the Bible,
That's
which
interesting.
yeah, I
Sure.
was listening to something about that the other day and I was like, that doesn't make sense. This book was made like what 2000 years ago.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
what
that's called
what is that
prophecy. Prophecy
yeah,
is something
yeah,
that's written in the book
that's
that
mhm.
comes true in the future.
Yeah, and honestly, I think if I could do more research on the Bible and then find out what we don't know yet, like scientific wise, that is already in the Bible, what I could kind of bring to the surface. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like,
Okay.
think
So,
about that stuff. But I don't know.
we got this big interest for things out in space.
Hmm.
How do you bring that down? Literally, how do you bring it down to earth? So let's talk about
Yeah.
this. We go through this transition from um, the house, living with your mom and dad, your sisters,
Hmm.
and you transition into college, right? Talk to me a little bit about that transition and how that was.
Um, that transition was very needed. And I think that it was one of the best things that has ever happened to me, not gonna lie. So obviously we have a very good relationship. I That is one of the things I am most grateful for. Their family is very close. Then again, and I'm not gonna say but because I don't ever like I don't mean this, but I don't want that. So what happens is that I wasn't sheltered by you guys, but there was a lot that I didn't know about myself. Okay. So going to college, high school, that was pretty easy. That was something I was just like, I'm fed every day by my parents, which I'm not fed every day here. I got to figure it out.
Got to
And
figure it
then,
out.
yeah, I kind of have to have, and I would say discipline isn't the like only word I'd use for this, but it is something, and I have it in here in my notes, is like your relationship with yourself grows a lot. So, and it can grow in good ways and it can grow in very bad ways. So, my habits have changed since being home. And
Mhm.
then kind of like my relationship with myself. So, one of the biggest things that I saw being here is like I am and almost in an easy way, which I think is why we have college, is like that kind of like transition to almost adulthood. Is
That
I'm no
definitely
longer
helps.
with you guys. Yeah, for sure. I'm no longer with you guys. School is practically my job right now. Sucks that I'm paying to work, but
Yep.
still, like
Your purpose.
you yeah, you're kind of
Yep.
finding out what at least now it's at least okay. I think the best way to word this or focus this is right now I can almost see what I'm doing with my life. Like obviously there's subject to change. There's a lot of stuff that can go on, but I am at that point where like my next step is going to be my profession. So
Sure.
right
So
now I'm
basically, that
building
confusion is
mhm,
starting to clear up. Like, what am I going
yeah.
to do with my life and who am I going to
Yeah.
become?
And I like having options. So, like with the Space Force stuff, like I can see potentially the next 10 or so years of my life, and I
Yeah.
can
And what
see
you're doing with
what
it.
I'm doing there. Yeah, and kind of how I want to influence what I want to see is what I can influence in my life right now.
Well, the transition's interesting. So, you being the oldest, you leave the house. You've got two younger sisters. It changes the dynamics in the house, right?
Yeah.
So, talk to me about like your identity. So, kids get a lot of their identity from two things. When they're young, they get their identity from things that they're good at compared to their peers. So,
Okay.
if you score well in school, you have a positive identity formation because you're like, okay, I can do well compared
Yeah.
to my peers.
Academic validation. We've said
Right.
that a
And
lot,
then
my
it
friends
can
and I.
also be in sports,
Yeah.
it can be in different extracurricular activities, like you could be really good at snowmobile racing or dirt biking, something where you excel and you start to get some confidence in yourself. Those things help with the identity
hmm
formation. But a big part of your identity is part of mom and I, right?
Yeah.
And
Hugely.
so as you're leaving school, excuse me, leaving the house and going to school, that identity needs to form. So, what are
Yeah.
some things that you have used to kind of form who you are now outside of our house?
That's a really easy question for me, and that wouldn't have been last year. So my relationship with God, I would think, is the biggest thing, hands down, 100%. I'm not even gonna say I think because that's subjective. So my relationship with God has been the first, the most important thing in my identity at school.
Okay.
Like in the way that it affects my decisions, the
Hmm.
people that I surround myself with, my time, my priorities. Like there are certain things like that, and I've made obviously mistakes, like everybody does. But the mistakes that I made, for example, last year, I can tell if I would have changed the priorities on what choices I made or what things I spent my time on, I could have been light years ahead in such and such subject. So
If you
that's
had
something that
focused last year,
yeah, or just in general, but saying
yeah,
last year and sort of the identity, like
yeah,
the
yeah.
formation as a
You start
college
realizing
student.
if your priorities in an order, things
Oh,
start to
yeah,
work better.
it is the utmost most important thing.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
to me at
then you're
least.
taking your identity not from this world, right? So
No.
that's a healthy way to form an
Well,
identity that
if you think about it, we're influenced by everything around us. So these little gadgets are showing me what it is like beauty standards. Okay. Like those
sure.
are obviously hurting a lot of kids. And then you give like classes and how kids should be performing, which I've never been a great test taker, but like, that's not the point. And then something it's actually just popped into my mind, which has honestly helped me a lot, like, not stress-wise, because stress is something that I feel like I'm pretty good at managing, and I do a lot of things to prevent stress, like, building up in my life. But another way is, like, I saw and I think this was just came up on, like, my Instagram or something the other day, and it was this girl going, "Your grades don't get you into heaven." And I was like, thank God. Like, not that my grades are bad at the moment,
Right.
but it was just something like your test grade doesn't dignify if you get meet your maker, or it doesn't affect who you are as like a person. So
Mhm.
that is something like identity wise that I think can really help kids is being like, hey, yes, my like the people I hang out with are a part of my identity. My time and where I spend it is part of my identity. The
Sure.
schooling, that's a huge part of my identity right now. You
Yeah.
won't
So
find me having
basically,
conversations about much else.
your
Yeah.
habits are part of your identity, and habits can
Hmm.
actually create a positive identity, especially if you do something enough that you become that person.
For sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of like habits, I've been super kind of interested in what not like fuels me, but what I put into my life. So that could, for example, be like food. Like I try to eat healthy and I try to eat clean. But I'm also talking about the sense of like the people, like going back to the people that surround you. This year has been a prime example of who I want to surround myself with.
Sure.
Like I have so many social groups that I love dearly. I could not mix those social groups because I don't believe they'd get along. I kind of feel like a chameleon in the sense because I can like show a different, like not sides of myself. 'Cause I feel like I'm not a two-faced sided person, but you do show people what they want to see. It's the
Mhm.
people that you don't have to do that with that I like to surround myself. So, like the girls from SALT, which is a wonderful like Christian organization at MSU. I have surrounded myself by them more so than almost anybody else that I've worked with this year.
Sure.
And people wise and like communication and talking, like those people I can talk to, and it's not something that I need to like change what I'm talking about, sort of thing. So I find that something like putting like what you're putting into yourself and also what you're kind of projecting out is like the conversations are better. The ones that I'm hearing coming into me, coming into like the whole soul thing or soul idea
Yeah.
are better. Like this is something that I've kind of, and I talked to Hayden about this, obviously my younger sister, if anybody doesn't know. But what we listen to song wise, like you look at rap
Types of
and
music.
yeah, it's obviously derogatory and there's some things that are
Mhm.
said in there which give me a good beat and I love to work out to that, but also think about what you're bringing into yourself. So what you surround yourself with, and music has been something that I've been like, I need to change that because I no longer like its effect on me.
Mhm.
So now I'm listening and like my song choices have changed profusely. Honestly, I kind of go in like different little themes or whatnot. Like sometimes
Genres.
I'll like,
Yep.
yeah, genres, themes, like whatever I'm feeling. But the derogatory sense has definitely decreased on 100%. And
Mhm.
then podcasts, like I do love a good song, but I also listen to my songs like 50 times in a month. Like the repetition gets annoying. So when you have a podcast, obviously like the one we're doing now, you kind of
Sure.
get to change what you're bringing in and what you're thinking about. So that has been
Yeah.
something
Podcasts are
that's
interesting
greatly
because you get
important.
to have a very organic conversation. So
Yeah,
one of the things I've
100%.
come up with that I think kind of explains why I invested so much in you growing up and so many conversations. We orient ourselves in this world by conversation. So
Hmm.
the better the conversation you have, or the more people you get to talk to, the more input you get on what's going on. Right?
Yeah,
We're
for sure.
super
Well,
social creatures. Yeah.
yeah, look at how much your conversations, and I'm just thinking about this very like plainly, have completely affected where I'm going. Like,
Right.
imagine if we didn't look at the stars, like we didn't go stargazing on the property. I
Yeah.
would probably be following in your tracks, if not doing business.
Or
Like,
doing
cause
something
just
different for sure.
yeah, something that I would do just to be professional at something or good at something,
We
but
did a
not
lot of
something that I like.
stargazing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
one of the most influential things that has ever happened in my life. for
Sure.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, conversations under the stars, you can't. The only other place that you can
You're
have a great
not beating
conversation.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. The only other
for
place
sure.
might be around the fireplace, or out by the fire pit. Those are
Mhm.
two places for
Yeah,
good conversations too.
yeah,
So,
100%.
okay.
Oh,
So we talk about the transition, leaving the house. And it's interesting because college allows you to have kind of like a buffer. You're
mhm.
not fully on your own. You don't have to worry 100% about expenses, right? You don't
Yeah.
have to make a mortgage payment, a vehicle payment. There's not a lot. The responsibility load is present, but it's um it's surrounding the education part of expanding who you are. And
Mhm.
then once that happens, then you move more into life where you're focusing on um, building a career, building a family, getting moving. There's some responsibilities there.
Mhm.
So those transitions, um, they're they're challenging, but they're fun. They're fun when you get over them and you see different things come up. So we
Yeah.
got the identity portion, right? Who we're becoming,
Mhm.
part of our habits, decisions we make, where we take our identity from, right? So if you don't take your identity from this world, that's a really interesting viewpoint. What if you did identify 100% with the world? Then if things change, you could have a real identity issue, right?
I get that. I think that's why you see a lot of identity crisis because when people focus their identity about money and money, guess what? That doesn't always find everybody because that's just how the world works. Then their identity falls apart. If you're putting it around
Yeah.
materials, that falls apart. Certain people, some
Oh yeah.
people, like I've seen this a lot, especially granted, I'm getting out of the sorority at the moment, but there are girls in there that I love dearly, and they focus their identity solely on whatever guy is giving them attention or whatever guy in their life is with them, like the guy that they're dating, the guy that they have a situationship with, or whatever is
Mhm.
going on with them romantically. I
Yeah.
understand
And
all
so
of it
then if
because,
that situation changes,
yeah,
it affects who they are deeply,
hmm, yeah,
right?
for
Which
sure.
then affects their personal life because they're taking their identity from that situation.
Their
Yeah,
personal
that's it.
life, I have witnessed it firsthand, starts to fall apart.
Right.
Like,
Because of the
it's a
stress of the
very
change.
sad thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
but there's also a sense, like, if we started, and I don't mean, like, we as in you and I, but I'm saying, like, we as people,
Hmm.
like, say that like, started doing more of, like, an identity, like, "Hey, what is right with your identity and then what is wrong?" And people start kinda getting and visualizing, like, what happens if this goes wrong? Like, I don't think, and I talked to Hayden about this a little bit, like, she's dating Spencer, and they're a very cute couple. Then again, if something goes wrong, how much does it affect her identity? Because she's in high school, and
Hmm.
she doesn't really understand all that stuff yet, but she is starting to think about this now, which I think is an amazing thing that people need to start thinking in their
Well, that
relationships.
happens if somebody matures.
Mhm.
Sometimes
Yeah.
people don't go through that maturity process.
Yeah, that is very
Yeah,
fair.
you had mentioned something pretty important too. You said some people take their identity from money.
Mhm.
I read something the other day that was real fascinating. So we talk a lot about the 1% in the United States, the 1% being the ultra
Yeah.
rich, wealthy people. To be the 1% in the world, the entire world, you need to make
Mhm.
$30,000 a year. The top 1% of people in the world, you make $30,000 a year. That's how
That
wealthy.
doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem right because people don't understand how poor the rest of the world is. We're so busy in the United States comparing ourselves to the Instagram stuff you were talking about
Yeah,
and
the
the
influence.
wealthy of the United States that we don't realize how good we have it.
Mhm.
And so people aren't very thankful for what they have. Um, and then they start taking their identity from, like you said, the material things,
Mhm.
like, hey, look at my house and look at the cars that I drive, all these trying to
Mhm.
influence how people see them. Yeah, and those things end up changing. So something I've noticed, and I've been blessed with a practice to see lots and lots of people.
Mhm.
And one of the trends that happens as people get older is they downsize. So it's always fascinating to me that people spend their whole lives trying to build, get bigger, get a bigger house, do more. And then as they start getting older, they start going back the other direction because
Mhm.
um, I think, I don't remember who said this, but you can get so much stuff that the stuff now starts to own you, right? You're so busy taking care of all the things that you can't spend any time doing what you want to do. So I've heard that for years. And instead of playing that game, right, I don't want to
Mhm.
constantly flip houses and constantly try to keep up with the Joneses and do all that kind of stuff because I've seen all the people that have said that game's not fun as they get older, right? And we had some friends when we first moved to town. They started in a nice small house and then they flipped and they went to another house and they flipped, went to another house, and then they got divorced. So all
Mhm.
this effort in trying to um, make a name for themselves or live in the largest house in the neighborhood, and they're not even a couple anymore because they were focused so much on that, trying to be somebody they weren't. Right?
Yeah, the materials.
Yeah, and it's very easy to get sucked into that because we have this tendency to think that people care, and honestly, people don't really care. Right?
Nope. We don't have
So
enough time. Let's be real.
yeah,
We're here for a blip, and we care about the materials, which everybody,
right.
yes, I do like a good, like, dress or an expensive dress or, say, an expensive car, but in reality, no one's gonna know you by your expensive dress or expensive car.
Right, for sure. All right, so we'll go through transition, identity. Now we'll get into the purpose part. So
Mhm.
the interplay between those three items, the transition, identity, purpose, is what I call the tip method.
Mhm.
And purpose is a big word, right? And if you feel like you're lacking in meaning or purpose, you can really struggle in life.
Yeah.
So, how do you get a sense of meaning and purpose in college doing what you're doing right now?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but it is God. I'm not gonna lie, because it does not make sense to have a purpose in anything else. So, one thing that would kinda strengthen my resolve in that sense is, what are we doing here? Like, that's a great question. Going back to what you asked me, what keeps you up at night? I don't know. Why am I here?
Why
Like,
am I here?
it
This
doesn't
is a
make a whole
question we
lot
have
of
to spend our
sense.
whole lives figuring out.
For sure,
Yeah.
exactly. And I would also say this is a funny little like, hey, let's say data point. I don't know, like
Mhm.
fun fact. We have a 1 in 4 trillionth of a chance of being here, being the person that you are with the family that you have at the time that you were born in this century. Like, it makes no sense why I'm here.
Mathematically, right.
But yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like, statistically, that doesn't you don't have a good reason. Okay.
right.
So while I'm here, if I can do the best that I can through him, through God, and then do the best that I can at something I love, what I'm doing, like, if you go back to how has like this all connected and like why am I here? It is through him and because of him. Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm studying this stuff, and granted, I pray about my like grades and stuff like that, but it is on me. Like, obviously, what I'm doing here is on me. What he's doing here is literally like if I have my path and I think I'm going this way, he's directing that path. Like it makes no sense for me to try to barrel through college with one set goal in mind, especially when we just talked about like your identity. Like, say I put my identity in where I end up in life, and say I
Sure.
don't end
That could
up
change,
being, oh my
right?
God, that could change in a heartbeat.
And
Say
it
I
will.
lose like
Actually, it will change.
it does. It
Yes.
already has. Like, there's been quite a few instances where I thought that this is where I'm going, this like relationship wise. Like, I had a relationship that I thought was very serious. To me, I thought, oh, hey, this might go somewhere. It didn't.
Right.
That's okay. I learned a lot from it. Thank God I did, and it wasn't the right person. But then again, it wasn't the path that he had for me. So
Right.
when you get into like the purpose stuff, why I'm here, who knows? If I was not supposed to be here, I think I would have been on a very different path. So I am here,
Right.
and that is something.
And what do I do about it?
So
Right.
yeah, exactly. And what I'm doing about it right now, like I would say going through everything with grace is a big thing. I'm not perfect, so I'm not gonna say my life is completely peaceful, graceful, like it's not. But do I have grace in my decisions? Yep. Am I peaceful? Yep. Like granted, like I'm coming into exam week. I just got 100% on my exams. I'm very happy and academically validated at the moment. But then again, like what affects me now and kind of like the decisions I make now solely rest on him. Because I'm like, it doesn't make sense for me to try to do something that, yeah, might be like my goal or my plan and put everything into that when it's subject to change. Because that's life. Like,
That's life.
you, that's just,
Yeah. And
that
so
makes
I call
sense.
that the life
There's,
flywheel, right?
yeah, for
And
sure. So,
a flywheel, like
yeah.
in a tractor, is a huge round piece of
Hmm.
metal that once the engine gets it rolling, it keeps that engine going. And that's
Yeah.
kind of life. It keeps rolling. And these
Hmm.
transitions and these changes in who we are and figuring
Yeah.
out our purpose as we move through life, it's an important question, right? We
Hmm.
got to constantly be engaging with this conversation.
Yeah.
One
And
of
I
the things
think,
that I always say is, go ahead.
no, 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 you keep going. I'm okay. I'll add it on in a second.
Um, one of the things I write about a lot is I say purpose is a verb, right?
Hmm.
That means purpose needs to be in action.
Hmm.
A lot of people think about purpose like a lost piece of luggage, like, hey, I got to go find my
And
purpose.
you'll tack it on
And
later.
it's
Yeah.
not,
No.
right?
Yeah.
Or everybody else found theirs and I can't find mine,
Mm.
right? So they always talk about it like it's external of who they are.
Hmm.
Purpose is internal. Purpose is something we need to discover and then we need to act on it, right?
Yeah.
And
And
so,
if I can add to that, so when you're asking me about purpose, it doesn't take me much more than 2 seconds to answer you because if my purpose is something that I have no idea what's going on, then like look at like I think about this in the sense. So say the Space Force stuff, wherever I go with that, he's bringing me there. So I kind of have a purpose in that. Okay. I have a
right,
purpose. I have a peacefulness in the fact that he is bringing me there or wherever I may end up. I might not end up there. Who knows? But it also saves me the stress and confusion about purpose with myself. Like, I'm
right,
not stressed and confused when someone asks me who I am. That is one of the easiest questions you can ask me, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't think very many people can answer that
definitely
solidly.
not in college.
No, exactly, and
No.
I would
Uh,
even argue not a lot of adults. Like,
there's some
y
adults that struggle with identity. Yep.
for sure, and I think
And
we all
purpose.
do a little bit for sure, because nothing is solid,
Right.
but when I have that thankfulness, the gratitude that my purpose is in his hands, the stress is like non-existent. It makes no sense
Right.
to have it. Like, why
Yep.
would you be stressed out about a plan that is literally godly, that is bringing you to an amazing place? Like, I went to this sermon the other day, and they were talking, and he was like, he kind of made, and this is a really weird way to say it, but we are here for about 80 years, like average life
Yeah.
expectancy going down, but say like 80 to 90 years. So that is not a lot of time.
Very
So
short.
very, very short and
If
very,
you're
very
in
crazy.
midlife and you just heard that, you agree 100%. Life is
Oh,
short.
for
Yep.
sure. And I'm already through this semester, and I felt like I started yesterday. Like it's something that you're just like, oh my God, it's flying. And I love it. I do.
Goes
But
fast.
I have a lot of like gratitude for having his, like, my life in his hands. Like,
Sure.
it makes me like, and I kind of want this, like, where I'm going with this at least is whenever I pass, I get to go see him. And guess what? I don't die there. Like,
Right.
you have all this time to kind of find out who you are, your purpose, identity, everything. But then you're going somewhere even greater with the person that made you.
Sure.
Like, that's
Well,
something that's really, really insane to think about.
so the opposite of what you're talking about happens quite a bit. And that's when people struggle
Mhm,
with that combination. And that life flywheel, fortunately for you, life experiences haven't created a lot of chaos in there.
mhm,
But I'm thinking about a girlfriend of yours from high school. Her dad passed away, right?
mhm,
And that's a huge um, challenge, right? We could put it under the transition, but depending
mhm.
on where somebody is in their identity formation, that can really, really set somebody back when they're not
Yeah,
sure who they are, and then they go through something that stressful, and then
mhm,
you compound that by not having the purpose. Um, and then that's where the anxiety and the depression set in, is where that confusion lies, that confusion
mhm,
on who we are. And it's pretty interesting. So years ago, when I was working with some veterans, I had been involved in a veteran suicide prevention program, and this is how I came up with the TIP method. It's pretty interesting. Um, we were working with people that were having what we call existential crisis. So that's actually somebody that's questioning their time on this earth, literally,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
The other word for that is suicide, which I really dislike that word, but we understand what it is. So, an existential crisis is literally questioning why you're here and maybe I shouldn't be here. So, I'm
mhm,
driving home from the office one day thinking about that. Why would somebody do that? And the tip method was basically a triangle that jumped into my head. And that's how I figured out that life flywheel. When somebody gets to that point, they're struggling through one or multiple transitions. They have a complete loss of identity and they have a loss of purpose. And that can create so much chaos that some people question why they're even here.
mhm,
Right. And so listening to you talking about yours being pretty firm, your understanding of who you are and what you're doing is a blessing, but not everybody is afforded that.
mm.
Right. There's a lot of people that struggle with figuring out who they are, and college um, can sometimes reveal it and actually sometimes make it worse. Right.
I 100% agree that I've seen it in both
Yep.
ways, for
Yeah.
sure.
No, I have too, for sure. So, all right. So you got all these interplays. Then tell me a little bit about salt.
Salt. So they it has been it was kind of funny how I was introduced to it. I started last year spring semester, and I was really kind of like, oh, like, hey, like, these, it's kind of in a hard way, Christian organizations out of college. So you have a very broad spectrum of the kinds of people at college. Um, and I was at first introduced to the party scene at college. That was the first thing that kind of happened to me when I got here was I met these new people. I completely trusted people that I've met within 3 days because we all lived together. But we ended up going and seeing like who was at MSU. And granted, that was a very fun experience, but it also was a fun experience I would never do again.
You
So
definitely don't want to
it
get stuck in that,
no, and people
right?
do for their
People do.
entire college experience. So
Or it takes them out of
yeah,
college.
100%. And
Yep.
honestly, with the stuff that I'm studying now, and if I kept those habits and kind of going back into like what surrounds me, which if I surrounded myself by the party scene, I would not be successful
Yeah, you
at
can't
all.
function
I
long
would
term.
have no, I would
Yep.
have failed out last semester. So the biggest thing, and that was something that kind of like was like, oh, hello, was there are people that I hung out with in the party scene that kind of not in a way like shielding is the wrong word, but I can't think of a better one at the moment. They kind of like take like a film over your eyes. So salt, I heard about it from them, and it wasn't a positive thing that they talked about. It was like, oh, these kids are really strange. Like they're obviously all big Christian kids. Like, and granted, no one wants to be called a weirdo or whatnot, or somebody who's not fun to be around. Like, I was at a point where I wanted everybody to like me. That has
Mm.
changed very much. And granted, and not in like a bad way, but I'm no longer like thirsty for validation.
Yeah, but
Okay.
this goes
So
back to identity formation, right?
100%.
So
Yeah.
last year you're figuring out who you are.
Last
Thank
year was pivotal.
goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness you figured
Yeah.
out
No.
a path that's going to lead to
Mhm.
more success than the other one,
For
right?
sure. And I
Yeah.
had a buddy of mine and he brought me to salt. And I was like completely dumbfounded. So there are, which is take our little commons church that we're at. There are 800 kids packed into not a very big building. Okay. Like we have rows of chairs. We call them benches. You put like a kid and a half on a chair. Like you kind of like all sit on the chairs. So it is a
Uh-huh.
really fun, like you get very close to everybody sort of thing. And one of the greatest things that was introduced to me at that time was how to have Christian values as a college kid. So
Oh
I
yeah,
am
that's
surrounded by the party scene. That's MSU. We have like 7 bars out there that you can walk out to at any
opportunity.
time.
Yeah.
Very much all the time. You have frats. You have people. Everybody's social. I'm gonna say most everybody is very social and wants to do something on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
So there are boundaries, and that's something that I think I set up for myself, which I set up in high school well, but they were tested in college and I reinforced them now.
Okay.
So that is also something. So I made it a point in my life that what I'm doing now, and I think we've already recognized this in the talk, but what I'm doing now is setting the scope for the rest of my life. My party scene now, I have my friends that I hang out with, but you're not seeing me partying. Like, I'm gonna
Right.
be completely honest, I have the best, most boring life ever, and I love it. Like, it is wonderful because when I look back and I actually had this is like a real life example. I had this the other day. So I looked at the clothes that I wore last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the stuff like the clothes that I wore out at least, not like your regular like to class clothes, but the clothes that I wore out. And we laugh with my friends because we'll go get dinner and we'll go have a good time with each other and hanging out. And that's another thing, the conversations that you have comparatively to the ones that I had last year with different
You mean
people.
you're not having conversations at a party?
Yeah, no, well, you're not having conversations that make you think or work at all. They're
Yeah,
all
good
something that,
conversations. Yep.
yeah, they're shallow and they have up to no importance, up like no
Mhm.
importance at all. So what we laughed at, my friends and I, is we look at these clothes that we wore last year for that we got attention in and that we wore to bars and that we
Mhm.
wanted to go like I don't know, like just kind of getting that bar feeling. And my friends, we wanted to go like out to dinner or something. And she's like, "Where are your bar outfits? We might go hit the bar after." And I was laughing because I literally wore a sweatshirt to that dinner, like a crew neck or something.
This is my new bar outfit.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah, 100%. Because what was hilarious is the stuff that I used to wear, I could not dislike more on myself now, but I'm in 10 times better shape than I was last year,
Mm.
which is like super funny because I look at that in the sense that like what I'm doing here is affecting how I like work as a person, like just who I am. And that goes back to the purpose stuff. But you see kids that are going out and doing these things and wanting the attention, the validation, like everything under the sun in that aspect. I no longer need that. Like that's
Well, that's
something that
interesting because
salt has given me though. Like let me relate this back to the question because I am with these people and we had a sermon the other day about how what is partying to a Christian. And for like, we had 800 kids that stayed after the sermon to listen to the second one. This is
right,
at 10 p.m. at night. This is important to them. This is important to, and granted, MSU has 50,000 kids. So 800 kids is not a lot, but it's people that I now like identify myself with. So
sure.
that's a lot to me. Like, that's
Yep.
important that the people that I surround myself with are also thinking like me.
Mhm.
So, in a sense, that has been amazing. And then I sadly was not able to make it to my Bible study group this week because just because of my classes and stuff like that.
Finals.
But
You got to get good
yeah,
grades.
I know,
Mhm.
happens. Darn. But the funniest thing is like this is 15 or so girls. We're meeting up at each other's apartments. We're hanging out and we're having conversation.
Sure.
So this podcast is gonna sound like a broken record because you and I just talked about how important communication is. I'm having
Right.
communication with my peers now, which are at levels that I didn't like I have been praying for in a friend. Like
Mhm.
you don't get this from your normal like walk of the mill kids that just don't care at this point. Like they don't understand
Sure.
or they don't know. I'm not going to say they don't care. I'm going to say they don't know.
Mhm.
So these kids that I'm having conversations with from SALT are shaping me. Like what
Yeah.
we're
Well, and they're
talking
also
about.
interested in some deeper questions.
Oh, for sure. The
Yeah.
conversations, and I also said this, but what I'm surrounding myself with and what I'm talking about, like one thing I've been very like observant about is how I speak, like swearing. I'm trying my best not to swear. I'm trying my best to speak clean, like speak with a godly presence. Like
Sure.
let's put it
Christian
that
values.
way
But
for
had
sure.
that's interesting. So SALT is laying out a lot of the issues that college kids run into,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
that's why I stayed with them.
and
For sure.
healthy
It's
boundaries.
scripture. It is
Yeah.
scripture put into a college student's life. That's what we're doing. There's
Mhm.
nothing that's like your outer like influences. Like it's not somebody's agenda. So that's really important. And then it's a bunch of kids that are looking for the same thing as you. And that is peace
Yeah.
and grace through him.
Yeah. And you're
Like
having fun with
it's
that group.
Oh my gosh, it's a blast. It
Yeah.
is
That's good to
one
hear.
of the best decisions I've ever made. 100%.
Good.
Yep.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a good
Mhm.
decision. Okay. I think
Yep.
that's a wonderful place to wrap this up. We've had a wonderful conversation talking about life and
Mhm.
particularly the TIP method, transitions, identity, and purpose, and how that's affected you. I want to thank you for your time and being
Thanks.
my first podcast. This is
Hmm.
crazy.
I know.
Launching this thing called Purpose Maker, trying to get more people and getting people to understand how important this stuff is. So, um,
Yeah.
do well on your classes this week.
Try my
Uh,
best.
I love you.
Thank you. Love you
And
too.
I will see you home next week.
Can't wait.
All right. I can't wait either.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll
Thanks for
sit
talking to
out.
me.
All right. Love you.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.